Recording in progress. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Garrett, how are you?
Doing well, Renee. I'm super excited for this Garrett Squared crossover.
There you go. Garrett squared. We need a logo.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, how should we start this? Do you want me to just give the intro?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, how's everyone doing? I see I see some familiar names. How's everyone doing out there today? What's up, KK? Um, yeah, so really excited to do this special crossover podcast today. Um, bring in the speech therapy PD family together a little bit closer. We're getting to know each other a little bit more. Excited to talk with the incredible Renee today. I'm just going to give a little, I'm going to talk about you, give you your bio here. So, Renee Garrett is a speech language pathologist and certified brain injury specialist from Hampton Roads, Virginia, which is why she got that awesome accent. She earned both her bachelor's and master's in speech language pathology from Old Dominion University. Renee has worked in a variety of medical settings, providing care to adults across the lifespan with dysphagia, cognitive communication disorders, and other neurologically based conditions. She has a particular interest in cognitive retraining following TBI and is passionate about educating patients, families, and caregivers on the impacts of dysphagia and cognitive disorders. She holds certification from the Brain Injury Association of America and is actively involved in professional service. Renee has served the Speech Language Hearing Association of Virginia in multiple leadership roles, including as president. She currently serves as secretary for the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia. And in recognition of her contributions to the field, she was honored with the 2023 Darden Fellow Award from Old Dominion and the 2024 SHAV Fellow Award. So, yeah. And she runs the
Nice.
amazing Brainstorms podcast. So, um, I think y'all know. So, yeah,
Well, and here,
welcome. Thank
Garrett, I'll
you.
introduce you. Garrett, I'm gonna off script a little bit here because you're a practicing speech language pathologist musician, which is fascinating, and a PhD student researcher at UCLA. He's based in California with a multidisciplinary background in music, speech, and cognitive science. You graduated from Emerson. That's amazing. This says 2015. I saw 2014 earlier, but either way, it's been a little minute.
Yeah.
Um, but you've given presentations at a lot of places too, language topics at school districts, along with the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association conference in 2018 and 2022. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But given Garrett's multidisciplinary background, he's passionate about how concepts and technologies from other fields can help inform clinical intervention for communication disorders. Um, I know you have to read some other announcement things, I think.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, we can gloss over that, but yeah, I think everyone knows that we have some ASHA CEUs available for you, point one ASHA CEUs, and also just the necessary disclosures. Like we each get compensation from Speech Therapy PD. I don't have any non-financial disclosures to report. Do you?
And you, yeah, just my secretary of the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia.
That's
Um,
right.
yeah,
And
but I
that's
want,
it, I think.
yeah. What did you present on in 2018 and 22? I want to hear about that.
Yeah, sure. So the 2022 was connected to the music thing, but it was about beatboxing. It was using beatboxing as a speech intervention tool. And we went over some research that wasn't research that I conducted, but I was working for an organization that partnered with university, Arrow University, and they had run some studies, and also Duquesne with
Hmm.
Dr. Ruskowitz, Rusevich. Sorry, her name is really difficult to say because it's spelled crazy. But yeah, so we presented together on some of the research and also on what is beatboxing? How could you use it? How do you implement it as a tool? So that was really fun. We did some beatboxing with the audience then. So
Why was I not at your presentation? I guess because we didn't know each
you
other then.
missed
That
out. Missed out.
2022 was Washington, D.C., and that was, I think, was that my,
I think it was New Orleans. Was it? Maybe it was
mm-mm.
2023.
Oh, because 2022 was definitely DC because we were coming off the pandemic, but we were still masking. And I think I did two presentations that year and I was trying not to throw up.
Oh man, that
Because
sounds rough.
I think that was my first year that I presented at actual ASHA. Like I think that was my first year and I was overzealous and did two talks and it was a lot. And then the next time was Boston and I was no, I'm sorry. Yeah, Boston. Was that I don't know. I get my years mixed up at this point because now
Boston
I've
was 2018. That was the first one that I did.
oh, I just
Or
went
they
to
could have had it
Boston.
later too.
Yeah, it's only been a couple years ago because that was recent. And then Seattle, I was an invited speaker, which there's no pressure with that whatsoever. So totally go for that.
Oh
No, my
man.
talk was on Friday at 5 p.m. So I was convinced no one was coming because Friday at 5 p.m., everybody at ASHA is ready to go do something far more interesting than listen to me talk about concussions.
And was there a crowd?
Yeah, I had
No?
like between 40 and 50 people, so I'll take that
Nice.
all day long. That's great. It's a very manageable audience as far as like you can get some interaction. You
Yeah.
know, you get people who ask questions and you get people who are over there in the corner just being like, "Oh my God, I have dinner reservations at 6:30 and I got to go."
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have that. But
Totally.
yeah,
I
that
think
has
mine was
nothing
at the
to do with
same
it.
time. But yeah, it was a similar crowd. Yeah. It doesn't get easier. I feel like even on these podcasts, I get a little nervous every time I start. Um,
Really?
yeah. Yeah. Has it like calmed down for you?
Yeah, I think I get more nervous between seasons because the first year there was no season. I just went straight every week from October to December that first year. I think I had every like a couple missing weeks and then from January to I don't even know when to be honest with you. I went every week and very few
Yeah.
pre-recorded episodes. So I think I did like 66 episodes the first year. So
Amazing.
it was rough a little bit, but at the same time, it helped presentation wise because I don't live presentations now, like in person, I don't get super nervous anymore, which is great because I was always like, I don't want to do this. Why did I commit? Oh my
Yeah.
God, why am I? I'm
Yeah.
sweating. Why am I sweating? So,
Yeah. Oh, I guess it has gotten better from I remember my first Asher presentation. I was sweating so much, just like sweat through my whole clothes and shirt, I think, through the presentation. But yeah, it does get a little easier.
yeah,
Um,
you have someone want to come hug you, and you're like, I probably need
I've
deodorant.
yeah, gotta take like 10 showers now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Well, it's super exciting to talk with you today,
You
we're
too.
going to talk about sound impacting communication,
Hmm.
and I just think it's this is something that I'm just so passionate about. I think sound is something that's really kind of misunderstood and underappreciated,
Hmm.
and I think a lot of it's invisible, so I think we take it for granted. But I think probably had that situation where there's like a fan on in the kitchen or something, and then all of a sudden it turns off, and you're like, wow, I can relax finally or something. So I think we have a deep, biological connection with sound. I think it's often sort of overlooked as a component of communication. And it's going to be cool to talk with you because so for everyone here, we'll probably be talking about both the developmental side. I know in the description it was mostly about kind of the older populations, TBI, stroke, things like that. And Renee will be more focused on kind of that piece because you have such a background in working with TBI cases um, and I'll be more focused on the developmental piece. Does that
Hmm.
seem feasible for today?
Of course, yes. I don't know if you
Awesome.
heard that sound. Someone upstairs dropped something and I did the whole startle. That's my
Yeah,
new that's my new thing. That's my post-COVID thing. Working in acute care during COVID, for some reason has made me super sensitive to abrupt sounds or unexpected sounds. So I think that's a
interesting.
really, yeah, it's a really, because so now what happens is I'm in Virginia. It's super, super cold. Like more, it's more cold for us at the coast than it typically would be this time of year from a consistent standpoint. And so what happens now is like my husband's a super early riser to go to work, so he'll leave super early, and I hear the garage door close, and then I'll hear like crack, pop, crack, pop, and the house
Hmm.
is like crack, pop, settling, and I'm like a puppy. It's so weird, or a baby. It's like a newborn. Like, oh my God, what is that noise? Is someone trying to get in the house? And I was not super sensitive. You know, if you hear a loud noise and it's unexpected, of course you're going to have a response. But now for me, it's been um really, it's almost, it's sometimes it's off-putting, to be
Hmm.
honest. Like I know that it's a manifestation of um what happened during COVID and working in acute care and like
Hmm.
a little component of PTSD, but it's not fun.
Yeah.
And I
Well, oh,
think,
go ahead.
no, I
Sorry.
think when we translate that into, um, you know, you mentioned TBI. When we think about our patients who've experienced some sort of trauma, whether they're aware of the trauma and conscious of the trauma or not. You know, I'm in an environment here where we have a lot of active duty and retired military, and a lot of them have been exposed to things that cause PTSD, or they've had TBI or multiple TBIs, but just TBI patients in general, they tend to be very sensitive, so they have hyperacusis, so sensitivity to sound. And it doesn't always have to be an abrupt sound or an unexpected sound. It can just be, like you mentioned, having like a fan in the kitchen or a fire truck. Their ability to process what that sound is, and it's not so much about you know, auditory discrimination, but it's like the ability to have the brain interpret what that sound is and what it means.
Yeah.
And by and large, it's more like super scary for them, or they have this like visceral response of they don't know what it is. And so it's either manifested in like an angry response or a emotional lability type response. So I think that's just, it's super interesting.
Yeah. This is so cool because you're touching on something so important, which is that the hearing brain is vast and it connects to all these biological systems. And so you
Hmm.
mentioned PTSD. Like, I think the big reframe, and this is coming from a lot of Nina Krause's stuff. So this is sort of the big point of her book of Sound Mind. But I think it's so important to recognize as speech therapists and as people working in communication is that our whole life in sound is actually encoded in our default responses to sound. So
Yeah.
that you think of, there's an example where, like, if you're sleeping, for example, you think if you're sleeping, you can be talking, people are talking around you and you'll probably sleep through it. But if someone says your name, someone's like Garrett squared, you're gonna wake up, and they can actually see this, like if they measure someone's brain response, they have a really, a huge reaction to their name, and that's because, over time you understand that your name's attached to meaning. It's important, based on your experience in sound. Your default response to sound has now changed. And so, like, you have these two pathways. You have the afferent pathway, which is like the normal one that if you look up on Google, like what happens in hearing, they'll show the pathway through the ear, and then the inner ear, and then through the cochlear nucleus and superior olive, and then all the way up through the brainstem into the auditory cortex. But and that's actually, just to mention this, it's the longest pathway of any other sense.
Hmm.
Um, but the other pathway, the one going back to the efferent pathway, is actually longer and more and larger, and has more connections than the afferent pathway. And that's because, like, you have this, um, when you have a sound, when you listen to a sound, it mixes with all of these other biological systems, your cognitive sensory motor reward systems, and it changes your default response to sound over time, right? So, when we are listening to the world, it's actually a measure. It's like very interesting, but it's a measure of how we've developed with sound, how we've engaged with sound. So, it's just as simple as the language you speak, right? Like, when you hear your language, like English, you're going to understand it. You're going to react to it in certain ways. Or if you hear a different language, it sounds like, gibberish. Like, so you can't understand it. It might like have some aesthetically pleasing qualities, but you're not going to get the meaning out of it. So that's
Hmm.
just, it's a really clear example of how sound, like our experience with sound changes, how we interact with it. So I think in this case too, it's like another example of like when you're startling, like you've had this event that's happened in your life, and because maybe certain sounds were associated with like some scary event happening, it then can change your default response to sound. So it's like it can be negative and positive, but I think we need to start with that frame to
Hmm.
understand how we can like leverage sound and music in a way that is more healthy, and more, it helps us with communication.
Yeah, because it's a really could be a trauma informed response. But even thinking about my patients with dementia, varied types, a lot of times and I've talked about this on the podcast before, but a lot of times what would happen is I would get this report from someone in, our nursing staff or whatever. Well, good luck. They're not talking or they're nonverbal or they don't, they don't respond. But often what would happen is I would go in to the patient's room, introduce myself, say, "Good morning, Mrs. Jones," or whatever the name was, and "How are you?" And "I'm fine. How are you, honey?" You're like,
Yeah.
because people go in and they have this preconceived notion that they are labeled nonverbal, so they're not going to communicate, but they still have those automatic social greetings. They still respond to things like sound of music, like their favorite songs. That's why we do that in coma stem with patients. They'll play family or, the staff will play favorite songs to keep that brain engagement going and have that familiarity so that because we know in these disorders of consciousness and in someone who's in a coma, they still can hear things that are going on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of research surrounding that. And, as particularly, I did my adult clinical placement in a skilled nursing facility in a long-term care. And one of the things that I had some of the best, like my clinical instructor there, she was so great. And it was such a bad environment, but she was so great. And she had a son with pretty significant autism. And so one of the ways she would reach him, and he was nonverbal at the time, was singing to him. So she would go in and sometimes sing to her patients in the morning to like help them wake up. And it was amazing to see the response when they would hear that song that for them brought them back to whatever space it was, whether it was a faith-based, like a gospel-based song, and they would have this smile on their face, or
Yeah.
they'd open their eyes and look towards her. It was amazing. So there's a lot to be said for sound and music for sure.
Have you seen that video of the ballerina, like the Spanish ballerina who has dementia and she listens to Swan Lake, and you can like see her, you know,
No, but I need to
see
I
her
need to
just
watch that.
light up. It's amazing. Yeah, people should definitely check that out. But yeah, music is so powerful. And I think one related point is that, and I think one reason that it's also helpful from a developmental standpoint is that neurobiologically we are what we do. It's like,
Mhm.
when you're doing exercise or something, like those muscles get stimulated. Like if you walk up the stairs every day, your legs are healthier than if you don't, if you're just sitting all day. So in the same way, um, like music is a wonderful whole brain stimulus that
Mhm.
is, that's helping your brain process certain harmonics of sound, and certain types of timing aspects of sound that are important, for example, distinguishing a ga from a ba.
Mhm.
So this is sort of related to Annie Patel's like opera hypothesis, which talks about like all of the overlap. So it's overlap, precision, emotion, repetition, and man, I forgot the last one. I can find it later. But all the reasons why music and like kind of helps with speech and language processing is
Hmm.
that when we're listening to music, like there's all these brain areas that overlap. You have to listen, you have to engage with the sound with a certain level of precision. It engages your emotional centers. So, like we were talking about, when your emotions are triggered, like you're more likely to improve that default response to sound that you have. So that's another aspect of it, and it's repetitive. And yeah, I think it maybe the last one's attention is that it grabs your attention
Hmm.
more easily. And yeah, you're mentioning working with autistic kid who enjoys music. Like it's so great when it's sometimes it's really hard to get attention, but music has this like really special way of capturing attention and specifically attention to sound, right?
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think those are reasons why like neurobiologically why music can be so impactful from a developmental standpoint.
Well,
And
and I think,
yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, one of the things that, you and I talked about when we kind of did a little pre-meeting 100 years ago for this was like a lot of, we were talking about cultural things and how, every culture in the world has some form of noodle and some form of bread, and they all have music. And so I think that,
It's all you need in life, really.
right. I had spaghetti and garlic bread tonight for dinner because it's Wednesday and that was super easy. But and I kind of cheated on my what I'm supposed to be doing, but it's fine. It was delicious. And I did make the marinara, so there's that part. But I think that those crossovers when we think about um culture, because we're talking primarily about lifespan and we'll get into some neurological disorders and things like that. But when we're thinking about culturally, every culture has some sort of or some form of music, whether it's an instrumentation thing, whether it's a chanting, a singing, like a choral singing. Every culture has that. So there's got to be a reason that stems beyond just, now our scientific research backs it up, but where 4,000 years ago, why were we doing that? I think it
Yeah.
speaks to our sense of connection in our culture, connection to each other socially, certainly, in more like an intimate relationship, you see that on old movies where it's like the guy's wowing the girl with the guitar and singing her a song, or vice versa. The lady sings opera and the guy goes and he's like in love. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of relationship, I guess, is a good relationship base, whether that is more of a romantic relationship or a friendship or a familial relationship that has that interconnection across generations of music. I know my not my family now because my kids are like they have their own musical taste, but the family that I grew up in, I had a very large. My grandmother was one of 12 kids. Everybody sang and played an instrument. I swear to God, it's probably how they like entertained each other because there's so many kids.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where there's songs that I hear. My other biological grandmother was a gospel singer, was in a gospel group.
No way. That's so
Yeah,
cool.
did a little touring. So they I had that on both sides of my mother and my father, both of them had that on their family. So I kind of go back to that sometimes and you hear those songs that you kind of forget about if you're not in it, right? You're not
Hmm.
listening. They're all, they were old when I was a little kid, so they're all dead now.
Yeah.
Sorry. Not to bring us down, but yeah, the point is I go back to that sometimes when I hear a song like that and I'm like, oh, I remember when Aunt so and so
Yeah.
harmonized with Uncle so and so on that song and he was playing the guitar or whatever. So it's just another way of connection. So I think that's another really cool aspect of how we connect music and sound and um, kind of grounding us as human beings.
Yeah. And have you ever looked at like the this is something I talked to Corinne, one of the other podcast hosts, about. But have you looked at the entrainment stuff at all? So one of
Probably, but
the
tell me.
yeah, no. One of the I guess purported reasons why like music is so powerful is that it was a social coordinator. Like,
Oh, yeah.
and a lot of people say that, evolutionarily speaking, it like predates language. Like,
Hmm.
so music came first. And it's like from Stephen Mivens, like singing Neanderthals and stuff like that. So, it's still, think of the debates out there. I don't think anyone really knows for sure, but there's a lot of good evidence to suggest that, music was actually, um, this that speech and language grew out of music, and
Hmm.
music was first a social coordinated tool, and that we used it to uh, find who is in our in group, basically. And so they've done a lot of research on um, what happens when you play music together with people, or when you're even just like tapping to the same beat. And they've done a lot of interesting stuff on, because you can imagine, how powerful it is if you ever gone to like a baseball game or something like that, and like people are chanting together, you feel it. If you're at a concert, like there's like
Hmm.
an energy there, and you feel more connected to people, like anecdotally. But they've actually done the research, and they've shown that, like, yeah, there is people will act more pro-social, for example,
Hmm.
after being on the same beat as someone. And they've even done this with like 14-month-olds. Like, so in, I think it was Dr. Trainer's lab, they had these uh, like researchers that were standing across from a baby. So they'd hold the baby like this. And then the researcher would either bounce in time with the baby like this. And so the baby's looking at them, they're bouncing in time, which is kind of weird. But, or they bounced off time.
Hmm.
Um, and it was so interesting, but the babies who were bounced in time, they were entrained to the same rhythm with these researchers. They were more pro-social. They were more likely to help the researcher with like a task afterwards. And like, they thought of them as a friend almost. Like, so there's this really, really powerful, aspect of music that's also kind of pro-social. So I think about this in like a, because I work with social groups and things like that. I think music is such a cool tool to use in your social groups, like in
Yeah.
speech therapy, because, if you're working on social stuff, it's nice to like start with doing something pro-social, and so you're kind of greasing those wheels, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, and that's interesting because like I know when I've had TBI patients, but also patients with aphasia who really struggled with the background noise, that's one of the things that we will eventually kind of bring into the space because we know, particularly if it's someone who plans to go back to work, they're going to have to navigate these background noises and this different space of hearing, right? Because they're
Yeah.
processing things differently now, but they've got to remember that I can still communicate and I can still do these cognitive tasks that increase my cognitive load because now I'm having to process this music, but I'm having to do this brain response task that's something I do at work, but now it's harder to balance all of those pieces. And I think you probably see that, when you were working in the schools with kids who same thing. They don't necessarily have to have autism or Downs or any of those things. They can just be someone who is sensitive. Maybe they had a trauma when they were younger. They had just a learning difference in general, and it's harder for them to process all these pieces and parts.
Yeah.
We also know that people learn differently. So there's visual learners, there's auditory learners. Um, when my husband was going to college, if anybody made a noise in the room and he's trying to write a paper, answer a question, do any of that, it was nuts for him. And I can sit there, I can have 400 things going and I'm still typing, I'm writing. I can do
Yeah.
all that all day long, but it's not the same for everybody.
Yeah, and they've looked at this biologically too. I know Nina's done a lot of stuff on this, where hearing and noise is such a big thing, and it's
Yeah.
interesting because musicians are actually better at hearing and noise in that. So they've tested, just musicians and non-musicians on like different tasks, and they look at like, they can do totally well when there's no noise, but then all of a sudden you put in the noise and it's like the musicians do fine and the non-musicians drop off. So and they've actually seen this in like individual neuron firing too, where like in certain it's not as if like the more noise, like the slower kind of response that you get or something like that. It's not a graded response. It's like at a certain threshold of noise, your response like totally collapses. And based on the research, like music and music training is actually something that can be protective in that way, where even those that played music when they were younger, there's this effect such that they can hear. They can make sense of sound better, I guess is really what's going on, is that you can take these little micro cues that are happening in sound and fill in the gaps that get covered by noise, I think is what's going on. So you're a better predictor of what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, so that I mean that's one way that we can uh, help. But yeah, I think another point too is that hearing it, like your ability to make sense of sound and like hearing a noise gets, if it does just drop off like that, there is this kind of misunderstanding that it's all a just a physical thing, like I'm not getting the right amount of sound, but it's really more about your ability to make sense of that sound.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it's a complicated picture, but like your ability to make sense of that sound is very important. um yeah, how do they, in, I don't know how this works in like older populations or in like someone that has a TBI. How do they assess your, if you have trouble hearing noise or if you have trouble making sense of sound? How do they assess that usually?
So I think it's more behavioral. We really don't in the like acute phase and the inpatient rehab, we don't necessarily have it. I've never had an audiologist on our team. I think it's more the behavioral response. So we know like we're looking out for startle or like maybe a negative behavior occurs because someone that maybe is like a ranchos level 3 or 4 who's kind of I don't like to use the word low level, but a pretty impaired patient with a brain injury who isn't fully aware, conscious. They're conscious, they're awake, but they're not able to process all these environmental stimuli. And so you may see like a PT take them into a gym with a bunch of other people and they just start, screaming or and that's not necessarily the norm, but maybe they're not able to attend to the task. They shut down completely. They have some sort of emotional response, or sometimes if they are a little bit more physically mobile, they'll just get up and leave because they can't handle the sound. So I think it's more of an informal assessment in those settings where you're kind of watching the behavior and the response to that increase in light and sound and seeing, okay, maybe we need to take a couple of steps back. Maybe this patient's better suited to be treated in their room where they're a little bit more comfortable. Maybe we need to take them to like where I worked, we had a beautiful end of the hall space with windows that overlooked the water. We could take them down there if no one was there, and they had the chance to just look out at the water and kind of chill out, for lack of a better term, kind of relax a little bit. Take it back way informal as far as let them initiate conversation, but also let them have their space. Because then, as soon as you start introducing that increased noise and that increased people's presence, right? Because people's
Mhm.
presence is a noise, right? You've got breathing sounds, and if
Sure.
you've got hyperacusis and everything is louder than we hear it on a regular day, you've got sound acoustics that impact their abilities, and they just, that's just been
Yeah.
my experience is that, it can be a positive or it can be a negative with someone who
Hmm.
is a patient with aphasia, and we're trying to make sure that um, we start to fade in a little bit more background noise so that we can assess how they're able to complete a task with that is a little bit different than, um, in the acute phase where let's go back all the way to acute care. We're in neuro ICU and there's 10 million machines going off. Maybe they've got some supplementary oxygen going on. A lot of times, what would happen is nine family members want to come visit because they haven't seen little Johnny in a minute, and they want to make sure he's okay. They got to physically see him with their own eyes, but that's too much processing for that patient because they're
Hmm.
already overstimulated with, for lack of a better term, a weird environment, right? ICU is a weird environment.
Yeah.
You don't know what time of day it is. It's always late in there. It's cold. There's lots of machines. There's beeping. There's noises from other rooms. There's yelling. There's
Yeah.
running. There's all kinds of stuff. And that's a lot to expect anyone to process, much less if you already have something that's altered the chemical responses in your brain that make you not be able to have um, a sound response, but also a sound interpretation of what you're hearing.
Yeah, totally. And that makes me think of like on the developmental side, because there's so much noise now, just increasingly more noise in the
Yeah.
world, in the homes. Like think of TVs being on all the time, devices are playing. It's so sound, like we were saying, like sound is really important. It's an important developmental growth stimulus, kind of like when you're eating food and you can eat food that's not good for you. So in the same way, like sound like your sonic environment when you're growing up. If you want to make sense of sound, if you want like your kids, your like especially infants, to help make sense of their sonic world, like the more noisy a place is, the less able they are to really make sound to meaning mappings. And that reminds me of a study too. They had like these kids who were in classrooms, and there's like by like essentially like one classroom was at one side of the school that was like right next to a big trains station, so they heard these trains go by all the time, and on the other side it was like on the quiet side. And so this one quarter, these students who were by the train, they like measured these two classrooms progress, and this class that was by the train, they did significantly worse on like all academic measures. And then it was like a natural experiment because for some reason they had to switch classrooms. And then when the other class who did well went to the class by the train, like their performance dipped a lot. So I think, when you're trying to learn in a very noisy environment, it's harder to make those sound to meaning mapping. So from a developmental like perspective as well, I think too much noise, like you have to really be careful about the environment. Just like you're saying, you have to be careful about not introducing too much
Too
noise
quickly.
that could be startling. So I think, yeah, it's just like just a note about how sound is, how we could think about it too. And it's like, it's sort of hopeful because it means we have a little bit of control. Like we have, some control. We can't control everything, but you can like put the TV on mute or something like that. You don't always have to have it going. And so I think for our kids especially, I think it's a overlooked aspect of development is that
Yeah,
signal to noise ratio. Yeah.
yeah, even thinking about like when I was still young. Like
Yeah,
when I was
still, yeah.
in middle school, high school, I always and my parents would say, turn the radio off. But if I was in my room, I always had the radio on. Always, always. It helped me. Like, I still to this day don't really understand why it helped, but I needed that to help me study. So I could be studying, calculus, I could be studying for the SATs, or I could just be studying um, AP biology or whatever it was. And I needed the radio needed to be on. It just needed to be on. And I'm still like that now. I need some sort of background noise. Not while I'm doing this, but like if I'm writing or I'm crafting a webinar or even grading papers when, I'm not teaching this semester, but when I was teaching, I needed that background noise. If I have complete silence, I find myself like, squirrel, what's that? Where's the noise? Oh, there's an airplane. Somebody's driving a motorcycle. Like it's just that environmental noise for me is so distracting. But if I have like a steady
I see.
noise, it's
I
just
see.
maybe you should
Just
do a
like
study on me.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense because you're like if you just have the environmental noises going on, then it's unexpected.
Yeah.
Your like brain's like always like, oh, what's that? Oh, what's that? But if you have something that's a bit more constant, I think you can, which
Mhm.
masks that other thing. I think
Yeah,
maybe
and you're
that's
talking
helpful.
about different areas of the brain that get stimulated like immediately versus, I think when we're thinking about something like melodic intonation therapy for aphasia, one of the reasons, and this is, I'm not MIT certified or anything like that. I just know the
Mhm.
rationale. But I remember being in graduate school and even being in early in my career and people saying, it's a different part of the brain. That's what I always heard. It's a different part of the brain. And now when I'm teaching my students, it stimulates that initially, but we have to remember that your brain isn't only functioning here and only functioning here. We have
Yeah,
those functional MRIs that say if this particular language piece or um, this music thing happens, it lights up on the functional MRI. But we know that, your brain interaction is front to back, top to bottom, and I'm simplifying and right to left. It's
yeah,
there's connections this is what I do to my students. I'm like
yeah,
this way, that
yeah,
way, you know. So the connections are stimulated differently than that initial center that gets activated. And I think that's the part that we kind of forget, but we also kind of don't know because if you hear, oh, melodic intonation therapy activates the right hemisphere of the brain, then we're thinking, right hemisphere,
yeah,
let's do a
yeah,
tune. But we don't think about the fact that we need it to cross over and still go down to the affect those motor pieces that activate our speech patterns to begin with. And that's the part that it's it sounds complicated. And if you read research, it can look complicated and be complicated. But if you go back to I think those foundational basics of how neurobiology works, and you simplify it in those terms when you're dealing with students or even with patients and their caregivers, if you say, that's a great technique, but this is the rationale. What we're trying to do is make sure we're getting this initial stimulation, but it's got to stimulate these other pieces. And that's where neuroplasticity comes in. And that's a whole rabbit hole we could go down. That would be
oh, for
a whole
sure.
different podcast.
Yeah, no, I'm glad thank you for saying that because I think it's kind of it can be, fMRI research can be, it's great. It's an awesome, like
Yeah.
what an awesome tool to be able to look into the brain, on a,
Hmm.
in a dynamic way. Um, but, it is reductive. It can be reductive. And, even there's a lot of critiques in general about like, because fMRIs are looking at, you know, blood flow, oxygenation in different areas when you're doing tasks. But a lot of the brain can be active. I think it was like something like only 30% of actual activation was captured by
Hmm.
blood flow because a lot of the other parts of the brain are operating at the same time, but they don't require that extra oxygenation,
Hmm.
things like that. So yeah, totally. Um, but great point. Um, yeah, and it's so cool to think about the brain um, because I think it just brings in, it can be complicated, like you're saying, but I think at least it helps me understand that there's this other layer of processing beyond like just this mechanism. Because I think for so long, like I remember my grandpa always saying like, I can't understand that. I can't, when he's trying to be part of conversations, I can't
Yeah.
hear. I can't hear. And like his thought was like, it's just because there are certain frequencies that are missing that my ear's not working. I'm not getting the right um, stimulus. I can't hear these frequencies. Once I get a hearing aid that like will get the right frequencies up there, I'll be able to understand everything. And
Hmm.
and the picture is like more complicated, right? Um, and it's important um, to see a more nuanced picture because yes, it's helpful to have that extra, when you do, I think there's a lot of benefits to hearing aids because you're getting, um, a clearer stimulus, but your ability to make sense of sound is also that extra layer of processing in the brain
Mhm.
that's happening that needs to be, that you need to actually practice and work on.
Yeah, I remember my audiology professor. He was so funny. So he looked like a seafaring captain. He did own a sailboat, and he had the best hair. Like if the wind blew, he's having the best. Like think Gorton's fisherman. If any of you are familiar with that logo where the captain has like the hat, but he take the hat off and his hair would just blow. And he would say things because our class was at like 4:20 p.m. He would say things like, I'm so grateful to be here with you guys, but I'd much rather be on my boat with a Heineken. And he said that so many times, and just became like almost like a mantra for that class. But I remember, I always have to share the funny anecdotal stuff. Um, but I just remember him always saying that if you get to work with geriatric patients, what you're going to find is that even if you're not an audiologist, someone's going to come in and they're going to say, he said, and I'm not picking on the women, but it's usually the wives are like, he can't hear anything that I say, and I'm in the kitchen. When he delves into what the situation truly is, I'm in the kitchen and I'm asking him to come set the table, and he's upstairs and he's in the bathroom and he can't hear me. And he's like, well, he can't hear you because there's several barriers in place. And then, she'll say, well, yeah, we're in church and I'm sitting next to him and he can't hear me there either. And then he's like, well, that's because there's singing and noise and people coming in and out if it's, the beginning of the service or the end of the service, or you're doing fellowship or whatever you're doing. And I just remember him always saying that. And I would just sit in class and be like, oh, whatever. And then when you learn it and you get into the real world, uh, after grad school, and you're looking around, and it doesn't have to be in a therapy room. It can be like at church or in a restaurant. And you always have like the one old guy who's sitting there looking at the menu. Sir, what would you like to drink? And I'm not picking on the men, but they do tend to kind of have this. I know I have this at my house. It's selective husband hearing, but they tend to do that more, I think, than the women. Um, just from a statistical standpoint, their hearing loss tends to be a little bit more common. And the person's asking them what they want to order. So if you think about go to like I don't really go to chain restaurants anymore, but you go somewhere like a Texas Roadhouse or a Longhorn Steakhouse or whatever it is, and there's 50 other people in there. There's noise from the kitchen. There's noise from the phone ringing. People are ordering. People are constantly coming and going. It makes total sense that it would be hard for someone in a normal aging process who maybe doesn't even have a diagnosed hearing loss to have more difficulty processing that because their hearing mechanisms don't work as well as a 20-year-old's or a 30-year-old's um, hearing cells as far as, the complexities of hearing. So it makes
Yeah.
perfect sense.
Yeah. And that, yeah, I love that story. It's probably just, yeah, it's definitely the guys. They're worse at it. Probably brain deterioration too. But so I'm thinking of like different ways that we can help. So one is music. We talked about that.
Hmm.
Because musicians, and this is just anybody who has played, I think it was defined as anyone who has like played a musical instrument for like two
Right.
years. And they are better at hearing music and noise, making
Hmm.
sense of sound. They're better even when um, their actual hearing is a lot worse. So a musician's like actual sonogram could like their hearing thresholds could not be very good, but they're still better at hearing than a lot of other people, maybe just non-musicians that are matched on other things. Um, and that's because they've had so much time experience, again, that brain change that is changing their default response to sound. They're better able to pick up on very subtle cues. Maybe they're like, in FM sweeps or harmonics that they're able to pick up on those cues and then better predict, what's what they're, maybe it's language or something like that. But they're better able to make sense of the sound. Maybe not, because even though their hearing's worse, they're making sense of the sound better. So I think that's really important. A couple of other things that also can get in the way, when we look at um, bilinguals, actually, there's a protective effect. And I hope I get this right, but so that Nina actually goes over bilinguals and athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And there are two different mechanisms by which they hear better later in life. One is that, so for, um, if you could think of how our brain is processing sound, there's always a little bit of noise. So she does something called the FFR, frequency following response,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like an auditory brainstem response. So um, and she's totally advocating, and I think all SLPs should do this all as well to figure out if there's a biological bottleneck that's preventing people from getting a good signal. But basically, it captures the subcortical responses to sound for an individual, and what you see is that we can basically get a good picture of when someone's hearing the sound, like what their brain's processing looks like. But there's always a little bit of noise. So we hear something and we try and our brain processes it, recreates it, and there's a little bit of noise added to that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and some brains are very noisy. So, if you have a concussion, your ability to make sense of sound is extremely noisy. Um, uh, so the athlete has a quiet brain. Um, so when they're processing sound, actually that noise is attenuated to some degree. So
Mm-hmm.
athletes, I don't know the mechanism, but like they tend to have quieter brains, which helps them hear, helps them increase the signal to noise ratio by reducing the noise. And then bilinguals actually increase the signal. So then
Mm-hmm.
the noise levels are the same, but they're actually the signal is higher. So there are like kind of two ways by which you can increase the processing. So all those things being said, like at least there are things that we can kind of do to practice. And if you think about it, like especially um, for bilinguals and musicians, it's like a very conscious practice with sound, making sense of sound. And I think that the maybe the reason that's put forth for athletes is that it could be many things, but when you're in a game, right, like you're having to pick up on very subtle auditory cues when you're making decisions. So all these things involve um, conscious, like deliberate experience with sound in a way that forces you to make decisions about sound and process it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think all those things show like how important it is that we continue to engage, and that's one of the reasons too why the husband effect where they stop listening. That's actually really dangerous
Mm-hmm.
because when you don't use hearing aids and you tune out from conversations, you're no longer getting the auditory input. Remember, we were talking about sound as a developmental growth stimulus. You're no longer getting that stimulus to keep your brain growing, right?
Right.
So, and that's something that we know that hearing loss and dementia are like extremely tied, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if you've had any experience with that or seen that, but yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think this is the study I sent over to you that'll be in the show notes. But Wendell, Dillon, and Heinrich, this was in the Frontiers of Neurology or Frontiers in Neurology. It was a study from 2023 it talks about auditory processing and cognitive change during normal aging, and it goes on to talk about setting hearing aids, which is totally not what I'm gonna do at all. But I had the opportunity to teach a class on normal aging, and I taught it twice, and it was a really quick 7 week intensive course for graduate students. But this particular study talks about how, for a long period of time, people thought that this decline in cognition was normal, but it's not. Dementia is not a normal component of aging. But you do see that, there are things that are cognitive processes like auditory processing, and even like recall speed is going to be a little bit different because those things are breaking down as time goes on, but it doesn't mean you lose it completely. Or when you're thinking about something like memory and attention, the reason that Alzheimer's or another type of dementia is different is because the things that happen are atypical memory. It's not like you forgot where you put your keys when you came home from work because you were in a hurry and you were in traffic and you had to go to the bathroom. That's not the same thing as, like my mother-in-law had Alzheimer's, and she would do things like, um, leave the water on in the sink in the upstairs bathroom and leave the house. Or, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of people in the early stages of dementia will cook something on the stove and not turn the pan off and burn the pan, which is dangerous because that could lead to a fire.
Yeah.
And so things like that are, it's a difference between forgetting where you put your fork, but knowing what the fork is for. And that's a markedly different thing, right? So when you're thinking about processing sound, whether it's someone with a dementia, someone with, another neurodegenerative disease, or even a hearing loss, a TBI patient, a kid who has some auditory processing, like a central auditory processing disorder, that's more about how the sound is processed, and the cognitive load it takes in order to do that versus they don't they just can't operate in noise. That's two very different things. And I think that's one of the points that we both wanted to make in talking about this is that, um, the sound stimulus and the noise changes depending on your environment, your age, your disease process, and something like Parkinson's disorder as well. A lot of people with Parkinson's disorder have a lot of trouble with attending to things, and then sometimes we'll often have like a version of a central auditory processing deficit plus a hearing loss. And so all of these things kind of work together when you're thinking about not only the just the sound itself, when we think sound generally, but the intensity of the sound, how long does the sound last, the pitch of the sound, not just the overall picture. It's all those components of how our brain processes each component. And it all happens so quickly when you have normal hearing and normal cognition that it's like swallowing disorders. We don't think about how difficult we just swallow, right? We just do
Yeah.
that all the time. You hear
Articulation or
things.
anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you hear those things all the time, and you're able to process it because your brain is functioning the way that I don't like to say I'm normal, but but it's I don't have a hearing loss. I don't have a swallowing disorder. So those things for me are not a concern because they just sort of happen. Breathing happens, right? We don't have to think about that until you do because something changes and now you have this other neurological condition, or like for your kiddos, they might have another developmental thing that's making it harder for them.
Yeah, yeah, oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, like same thing. Like when you don't realize how difficult, like how much coordination it takes just to say, all these sounds that are coming out of my mouth right now. Even like the easier ones, it's like a bilabial plosive, a buh or something. It's like incredibly complex. Like
Hmm.
the amount of coordination it takes to do that is pretty crazy. And then when you break it down, you're like, oh wow, like all of these components need to go together. So kind of brings that to the fore. But yeah, the I think it's very, very important to um, like our brains are pretty amazing, and
Yeah.
they can actually overcome a lot. And I think that a lot of times when you do get to a stage where things become difficult, whatever it might be, it's easy to not no longer engage, which is just that is, the engagement is the thing.
Hmm.
That's the thing that's going to help you. Again, going back to like neurobiologically, we are what we do. Biologically, we are what we do. Like the things that we do repeatedly are, that's why it's so many of these being engaged in conversation is going to be neuroprotective. Staying engaged and trying, even if you do have hearing loss, it's a bit difficult. Like that um, just that intention to try, and that process of your brain trying to get around the sounds that it's making sense. It's like it's working. Like
Mhm.
that itself is like that's neuroprotective. That's growing. That's what is you're going to be able to do, you know? So like I think um it's just easy to think that, oh, I have a hearing problem, so I don't need to do this. You know, it doesn't have an effect on my brain. Processing sound is like the best you know, it's such an important growth stimulus, and it can be very enjoyable like music, and that's why music is so powerful. I think it's like a
Mhm.
whole brain stimulus.
Well,
So
it really speaks to why industrial places went to hearing protection years ago. It wasn't just about protecting hearing loss, but all those pieces that come along with that.
right.
And I think that general public, of course, again, community education, we have a long ways to go for a lot of these things because we simplify things, right? We're like, oh,
Hmm.
well, this worker in a factory needs headphones to protect him from the loud noise, but it's not just that. It's like you said, the neuroprotective piece of not having that startle noise or that extremely loud noise that over time, can kind of affect or cause tinnitus and things like that, where we didn't even really, we really, we could talk about this for another hour, but we don't have
Yeah.
time.
Oh
Because
man. Yeah.
it's so crazy to think that a lot of people just think that it's, oh, let's just protect their hearing, but they're not thinking about the ramifications of why. The why part is often, I think, the piece that's left out when I say community education is lacking because it's so oversimplified.
Oh man, the why part is totally left out, which
Hmm.
is why Garrett Squared has come to try and address this concern.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Renee, yeah, it was so awesome to talk to you. This is really fun. Um, yeah, I hope this was helpful for people. I think this reframe of thinking of sound as like, I mean, at least for me, like this helped me a lot to think of sound not just as this sense, but as um, you know, this growth stimulus, sound processing as an indicator of brain health, and then sound as a rehabilitation tool too. Like you
Hmm.
can, you know, this is neuroprotective,
Hmm.
and music being obviously a really great example of how that can be done very in like a very enjoyable way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think those things are important across the lifespan. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
do too. And we might have to have a part two, Garrett Squared. Who knows?
yeah. What do you all think? Should we do another one?
Yeah.
Um, that'd be fun. Cool.
Oh, we got some
Yeah.
claps.
Thanks, Christy. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just looking at the chat now. We had some messages, but yeah.
Yeah, I saw a couple of them. Yeah. Thank you for your comments for sure.
Thanks
Um,
everyone for your comments.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Garrett, thank you so much for having me on too and entertaining. For those of you who don't know, I bamboozled him at ASHA at the speech therapy PD booth and was like, we have to work together.
Yeah. No, it was totally mutual. I'm so excited this happened. Uh,
Yeah, me too. And it was great to see you and um, be sure to reach out with questions and I think I sent Garrett show notes. Well, like just a couple research articles. So we'll have those posted too so that you have access to those for those of you who are interested.
definitely. Definitely. Yeah, maybe I can link to that video of that Spanish ballerina too. It's like really
Oh, that's
powerful.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks, Renee.
Garrett.